Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. Today we're going to make some great bread. Italian bread. The method on this is a little different than what we've done together before. You can pause and write the ingredients down, but I'm going to go over them because there are a couple of notes about these. I had a little help. This is my great-granddaughter Athena. She's my helper. She's very excited. Let's get cooking. So I'm going to start here with 6 cups of bread flour. You can use all-purpose or a mixture of the two. I've got a tablespoonful of sugar, a tablespoonful of salt. I use kosher salt. And then I have here SAF instant yeast. And you have to use instant yeast for this method. It's a little different if you use active dry. And I have here 3/4 of a teaspoonful of diastetic malt powder. I've just started using that. That's something that professional bakers use. It does make a difference. Here is the pack. You can get it on Amazon. I got this on Amazon. I'm sure you can get it in any number of places. And it does make for more gluten and a little bit better browning color. So I have here about 2½ cups of water, and this is room temperature water. The ingredients list 3 cups because you might have to use as much as 3 cups. We'll gauge that as we go, and I'll show you how. Now I'm just dumping all the ingredients into the flour, everything except the water. The salt, the sugar, the diastetic malt powder, the yeast. If you use active dry yeast, and you have to proof it first. And in other videos I've shown you how to proof it. You would put a little of the water, the sugar, and the yeast in a separate bowl and allow it to proof or to start bubbling. Then you would pour it into the flour. Now I'm adding the water. I made a well in the middle, and I'm not using my mixer today. You can, and it would be easier to use the mixer, but you don't have to. When I start kneading, I'm probably going to wish I had used the mixer. But right now, I'm just mixing this up. Now, our goal here is to add just enough of the water to make sure that we get all the dry ingredients wet. It doesn't even have to be mixed very well at this point. We're just mixing the ingredients up. And this does take just a little bit of time. So I just sort of swirl it around and make sure that I have enough water to pick up all the flour. You don't want any big dry spots. And if you're doing this with a mixer, you want to use the paddle attachment for this part. Now there's a lot of flour in here. It's a big recipe. This makes 2 huge loaves of Italian bread. So it's kind of stiff here, but pull it up from the bottom. Make sure you get all the flour out of the bottom of the bowl. Now I ended up using 2½ cups of water with this, and I can't really foresee a time you'd ever need all 3 cups, but you might. You'll see later why you want to make sure you don't use too much water. You just want just enough to get this sort of gummy, shaggy looking dough, and to make sure there are no dry spots in it. And I know this is kind of funny looking, and I'm sorry I kind of pulled my bowl out of the camera range. I do this by myself, and so sometimes I don't get quite the right shot. But we're pulling it around, getting it wet. And by the way, when you're watching this video, it's actually parts of 2 bread making sessions because I don't always get the right shot. So I'm just going to set this plastic lid loosely on the bowl. I'm going to let this proof, I'm going to let it rise, just as shaggy as it is. It takes about 45 minutes. And then after about 45 minutes, and this will be more than double in size, I'm putting a lot of flour on my pad here. The 1½ cups extra flour. See, I'm going to pour this out, and this is very, very loose and liquid. And see all those strands that are forming there? I know you're going to say, wow, that's too loose. You can't make bread out of that. So, oh ye of little faith. Just stick with me a little bit. So yes, this is kind of a gummy mess. If I put a face on this, it would look like Jabba the Hutt. Lots of flour over the top. This is what the extra flour is for. And we're going to incorporate about a cup to a cup and a half in here with this dough, and I'm going to show you how to tell how much flour to use. So you're going to need one of these dough scrapers or some kind of a scraper. And we're going to scrape that up, sort of wrap it around all that flour I put on top of it. And what you're looking for when you're doing this is we're going to incorporate flour in, knead it in, until the dough is not sticky anymore, until you don't have to fight with it to keep it off your hands. And you can do this part, and I actually recommend you do this part in your mixer, but in case you don't have a mixer, I actually never show you kneading, because I don't knead much because my hands are not strong anymore. But you just fold and then hit it with the heel of your hand. And between each fold, you're going to sprinkle a little flour. And I'm going to show you one little thing here we've never done before. Keeping it very floured underneath and folding. About every minute, I pat it out and pick it up and stretch it. And it won't come apart. By the time you get a couple of folds, it's getting very, very sturdy. See, it still sticks to my hands, so we're going to add a little more flour. And you know, you don't measure this. Just keep adding flour until it doesn't stick to your hands as you knead it. And that's how you know it's ready. So I'll do a little stop action here, but you flour your board, flour the dough, knead it for about a minute, and then pick it up and stretch it. And then flour the board, flour the dough, knead it for about a minute, and pick it up and stretch it. And you're going to do this for at least 5 minutes. Knead it, stretch it, knead it, stretch it. And as it develops and it gets to the point where it doesn't stick to your hands anymore, you're going to have a beautiful, very elastic feeling dough. And it's gonna feel almost like velvet. I don't know how to explain it, but it feels kind of tough, like it'll stand up to a lot of pressure. Now, if you're doing this in your mixer, you just want to put that very shaggy dough in to start, and then add your flour, maybe a quarter to a half cup at a time. See, this is still not ready. I've been kneading it now for about 4 minutes, knead and stretch, and it's still a little bit sticky. You really just want to keep doing this until it doesn't stick anymore. That's how you know that you're at the right thickness and texture here. So when you get it, whoops, see, got to add a little bit more flour. And I think I may have added as much as a cup and a half, a little bit at a time. So if you're using the mixer, you want to add it until it pulls cleanly from the bowl and it's not shaggy anymore. And please, when you're doing this, don't be gentle. Beat it, pat it, you're knocking out air bubbles. Now I've formed it into a ball, and I'm going to put this in my proofing bowl. Oil it generously. I've thrown a little olive oil in here. You can use vegetable oil. You could use butter. But I'm not using butter in the recipe, so I don't have any out. And then oil the top. Flip it over. Make sure it's got oil all the way around it. And then I'm going to put the lid on this. Now, I'm not putting this in a particularly warm place, just room temperature. I'm letting it rise a little slowly. Don't want to speed it up. It doesn't take long for it to rise. This is the second rise. We're going to do 3 total rises for this. Oil the top. Go away and leave it for about 40 minutes. It'll double in size before you know what happens. And if you don't use the diastetic malt powder, it might take a little bit longer. We'll be back. Okay, here we go. I've floured this up again. And here is our dough. And it's still very soft dough. I'm going to flour my fingers and punch it down. And I'm really going to punch it down because we have lots of air in there. We have that little extra fermenting period with that first rise that we did. So this is very puffy, very soft, but it's going to be much easier to handle now than it was the first time. So we're going to break this up into two loaves, but I'm going to flour it some more, a lot of flour, because it might be sticky again. But I'm going to press it out, not really kneading it, but pressing it out, punching out the air. And the whole time you're working with it now, it's going to form bubbles, and you'll have to knock them out. And a couple quick turns with the rolling pin helps knock out those bubbles. Now all I'm doing is forming this into a shape so that I can cut it into two fairly even loaves. You can separate it out with a scale if you want to, measure it, and then cut two pieces of equal size. I've got measurements here on my little pad so I can get pretty close using that. So I just rolled it out flat, and I'm going to fold it over to get a sort of a rectangle that I can measure on my little pad here. And then I'll cut it about halfway in the middle, maybe a little bit more to the left because the left side's a little bigger. And just use my little dough scrape here. You can use a knife. Here, let's get it a little bit closer. Okay, now it'll be easier to work with. We've got it in two separate pieces. I'll set that piece aside, and I'm going to form this piece into a loaf. So knead it a little bit more, get that little bit of flour in, get it into a shape that I can work with. And then I'm going to roll this out. More flour. Let me put that one out of the way. Okay, so got my rolling pin. Form this into a ball. When I get it into a ball, I'm going to pinch it off at the bottom. See how I do my hands? Just push it in at the bottom. And then pinch this off. And that may not be necessary, but it just forms easier. And I don't want to have so many gaps in the loaf when I'm done with it. So I pinch it off at the bottom. And then I'm going to roll it into an oval. And I may actually have to pick it up and stretch it again. And I'm kind of rolling it hard. And as you roll it, you can hear the air bubbles bursting. They pop and crack and make funny noises. So I'm going to stretch it out here just a little. Sort of get it into the shape I want. And the shape I want is kind of an oval. You want it to be about as long as you want your final loaf to be. So now we're going to roll it real tight. All the way across. Like that. And flip it over, and then we're going to pinch the seam and tuck the ends under. Well, it's up because I've got it upside down, but you know what I mean. We want the ends to be smooth, and I don't want it to come unglued while I'm cooking it, and I don't think it would. This is still a very soft dough. But tighten it up like that and flip it over, and there you go. That's your first loaf. I have a cookie sheet over here, and I have a piece of parchment paper on it. If you're not using parchment paper, you can just use some oil or butter. Some people sprinkle a little cornmeal on their buttered pan to sort of raise it from the bottom, but I don't do that because my mother's allergic to corn, and she's going to eat some of this. I'll do the second loaf and be back. So I have a piece of plastic wrap here. I've started using this press and seal stuff. It actually doesn't stick to itself so bad, and I don't mind using it so much. I hate plastic wrap. So I'm just brushing it with olive oil, enough to keep it from sticking. And we're going to put this for its last rise. Again, just at room temperature. I'm not trying to make a warm spot. Cover this just to keep it from forming a film from the air. And this only takes about 25, maybe 30 minutes. I have my oven preheating to 375, and I'm heating a cast iron skillet in the oven too. Well, here we go. They're raised nicely, and I've got a little spot there that looks like it's coming apart. I'm going to gently pinch it together. A couple things we have to do before we actually bake this bread. We have to cut some vent holes in it because this makes a pretty firm crust. And if you don't cut some vent holes, then it may blow out on the side because you don't have a pan holding it together. So I've just got a little single-edged razor blade here. You can buy one of those little fancy tools. I'm just using a razor blade. And you want to just cut it enough to break the surface. Not too deep. You just want to cut it so that as it forms its crust, some of the steam can vent out. And then I'm going to brush this with olive oil. You may use an egg wash. I sometimes use an egg wash. I'll post a picture at the end of some of this I made with an egg wash. Just your preference. An egg wash would be 1 egg beaten with a tablespoonful of water and brush it over. And I think I'm going to put some seeds on this. I'm going to use some sesame seeds that I have. I keep them for making tahini paste. And you can use poppy seeds if you like. Whatever you like on top of yours. I've got sesame seeds. Or nothing. You don't have to do this at all. Now before I slip this on the center rack of my oven, I'm going to put 1 cup of water in the cast iron skillet that I have under the rack. And that's going to make a little steam in the oven to help your crust. So there you go. My cast iron skillet's down there with a cup of water. 40 to 45 minutes. And here we go. We're going to check our temperature. 190 to 200 degrees is what you're going for. So this is at 195. It should be perfect. Now I'm going to transfer this to a cooling rack, and it has to cool totally before you cut it. And these two loaves are kind of connected in the middle, so I'm going to transfer the whole thing without breaking them apart, because that would sort of be like cutting them. And I'll just take my paper with me. It'll be easy that way. And I'm going to wait at least a full hour before I cut them. I'll be back. So I've been good. I've waited an hour. I'm going to cut this. Is this beautiful or what? I just love Italian bread. And you can listen to it and hear the crispy crunch. So let's cut this. Now I'm going to cut down through the middle here where they touched. If you had a bigger pan, they wouldn't have touched. But these are big loaves of bread, so they took up the whole pan. And then I want you to hear the sound when I cut it. And then look at this texture, which is in part due to the diastetic malt powder. And you know I have to butter a piece and taste it. That's so wonderful. You know, if you don't want to buy the diastetic malt powder, you don't have to have it. You can make this without it. But I do believe that it makes a better texture. This is so good. And you know, it takes a little time. And you can use your mixer and make it quicker. I hope you try this. This is wonderful bread. You can use it for sandwiches or garlic toast or French toast. And you know, I promised you a picture of the bread I made with egg wash. Here it is. It might be just a little bit crisper. You can't tell much difference. Thank you for joining us on Debbie's Back Porch. Hope to see you again tomorrow.